Well, hello and welcome back to the Ecommerce Brain Trust podcast. I'm your host, Kiri Masters, Head of Retail Strategy at Acadia. And today I'm excited to be joined by one of our wonderful clients at Acadia, Tsege Gebreyohannes from Nature's Way. Welcome to the show, Tsege.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So I'll just read out your bio real quick because we're going to get into a little bit of your career background as well. But Sergey is the Senior Manager of Digital Experience at Nature's Way Canada. Sergey manages both the e-commerce side of the business as well as overall digital strategy and execution for the organization. Although she now manages a varied team made up of e-commerce salespeople, digital content, including social media, and our customer service experience, her background has been in traditional CPG brand marketing, and before that, coming from an advertising agency background. Sergey has been with Nature's Way Canada for now almost 8 years. So, for those anyone who's not familiar with Nature's Way as a company, as a brand, could you share a little bit more about Nature's Way, Sergey?
Sure. Yeah. So Nature's Way Canada, we're a natural health product company. That's what we call them in Canada. It's a heavy regulated industry here. So I think in the US, it'd be sort of vitamins and supplements is what we sell. So we've been operating for over 50 years, and we're actually a subsidiary of the Nature's Way US business, and our parent company is Schwab in North America. But yeah, so we're a large retailer selling things like vitamins, herbal supplements, omega 3s. And we just, we're just focused on sort of a consumer experience. And my team itself is, like I said, digital and experience. So we're sort of set up as a center of excellence model. So we don't roll up to marketing or sales. My team is a real hybrid, like you said, of sales and marketing people. And we're focused largely on sort of the e-commerce business and digital output, digital content, et cetera. And that's relatively new for us. So it's, just shy of 2 years ago where I was sort of put in this position to lead the team and operate in that way.
That's great. And what are your sort of for the company in general, maybe outside of your team's scope, what are the main sales channels for Nature's Way?
Sure. Yeah. So here in Canada, you can find us in sort of every major sales channel. So we are sort of in traditional brick and mortar with business at sort of Costco, Walmart, again, Canadian market. So we're talking Loblaw, Shoppers Drug Mart, Sobeys. And then, of course, Amazon as a big e-commerce platform for us, but also other e-commerce retailers like well.ca, FullScript, which is a closed looped e-commerce business that I believe exists both in Canada and the US. And then the sort of retailer.ca businesses as well. So the Costco.ca's, Shoppers Drug Mart.ca's of the world as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I asked this question. I've started asking this question over the last 6 months or so, and it's always an interesting point of the conversation. But was there a sliding doors moment in your career that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, this is a great question. I would say it was not so much a moment, but sort of a sliding doors progression for me. So, like I said, I'm a marketer by trade. So that's what my degrees are in. It's my background. I started in advertising. I thought I would be in advertising forever. Then I sort of happened to get an opportunity on the client side, as we called it, on sort of CPG brands, and I went there. And then I thought, this is where I'm going to be. But when I was with Nature's, like I said, I've been here almost 8 years, but sort of later in my time on the brand team at Nature's Way, our Amazon business really started to get a bit more focus in the organization. And I found that I was really drawn to it. So e-commerce in general. And this is before we had a sort of a larger structure around sort of an e-commerce, like I said, sort of a center of excellence model of sort of a whole e-commerce digital team. So there was sort of like the brand team and the sales team, and there's people on the sales team that focus on e-com. And on the brand side, I just found myself drawn to the e-commerce side of the business. I really loved the ecosystem that was just sort of not just traditional sales. I felt like you couldn't just do, at the time, what you would be doing in more traditional retail, which is sort of focusing on sort of your promotional strategy and your space on shelf, et cetera. There were so many other components to it. And like I said, I was sort of raising my hand for projects on the e-commerce side when I was on the brand side. We were actually joking about this last week at a meeting, which is like I was sort of leaning into it, doing projects before I was given this role. And then when it came time to kind of really hone in on this sort of area of the business, it was, I think, noticed that I had shown sort of keen interests earlier. And so I got to sort of lead the team. But yeah, definitely when I was on the brand side, I got myself very wrapped up in the Amazon business when it wasn't really my business, to be honest.
Yeah,
So yeah.
that's great. How did you make your interest known?
I did a few presentations about, and I was sort of raising my hand, kind of flagging and trying to educate the rest of the organization on what the Amazon ecosystem was. So I remember
Mm,
doing a presentation on Prime and how, it is such a big brand awareness platform, actually, that this is like, even if it's not, a conversion focused execution for a brand, using it as a platform for awareness, the amount of traffic on the site. So I was sort of always sort of championing this notion of like we should be thinking about it as much of a sort of a marketing platform as well as a sales platform, and then actually that making them work together in a way that's most effective. So I found that I was often, I think probably at that time leaning heavily towards sort of the benefit to brand is what I
mm,
was championing more than anything. But overall, I think I was just kind of saying like we should be taking this more seriously. I think
yeah,
was my message. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah,
yeah,
the education, opening doors is a big common thing. Like if you can educate internally, then it really shows that you need to know something in order to be able to teach it, right? So that's
yeah. I have really that's probably been the most rewarding part of this role and my time here, which is like have found in my career that digital and the e-commerce space can be sort of an intimidating business for maybe the people who are more used to traditional business.
yeah,
And I found it really rewarding to show that actually it's not actually it's like it just takes some time and some experience in it, and anyone can do it if you're willing to sort of pay attention and teach yourself. And so I have found it to be it's been one of my main objectives in my organization to try to fold in more of the business to try and help people understand better how this ecosystem works. It doesn't usually impress me when I feel like it's like only the digital team is so sophisticated that they understand this thing. It's not, to me, a strength when it's that way. I think that the more the broader organization can sort of take in and feel comfortable in this space, the better we'll do as an organization, as a brand. So I love it. I love to make things simplify it for anybody who's willing to listen. So
that's great. Well, let's jump into the topic that you and I have been talking about for at least a year now, I think,
yeah.
um, and it is random factory brands. And I'll just sort of give a quick definition for anyone who's unfamiliar with that term, and then we can jump into your experience on the brand side with this. But in many categories, I guess that there's a few that would be exceptions to this rule, like actual food products. But across a lot of categories, national brands are seeing a proliferation of factory direct brands. Brands that have um, no other distribution outside of Amazon. They may have weird names that are just all consonants, impossible to pronounce, and it's like someone mashed their hand on the keyboard and registered it with the USPTO. That's sort of the general feel of it. And because they are factory direct, they can be very aggressive with price, and they are, copycat products in a lot of ways. So a lot of brands in the apparel space are seeing this in consumer electronics and toys, and even in the health and wellness and supplements category as well. So it's become a real concern because they are competitive. They are, very much value oriented. They're getting more sophisticated over time as well. I think that is um, a, a bit of a barrier for a while for brands was, well, consumers are too smart. They're not going to take them seriously, and they can't run ads, and they don't have a brand, and they can't do content. Guess what? They can, and they have access to the same advertising tools as you do. They have access to the same content tools as you do. And now with AI in particular, content, creating nice looking native English content is easier than it has ever been before. So it's become a real threat to brands in a lot of categories. And I know this is something that you faced a few years ago at Nature's Way. So I'd love to get into, the beginning of that story and how you first noticed some of these random factory brands popping up in your as new competitors for Nature's Way.
Yeah, so I think you brought up good points in terms of like we sort of definitely underestimated this kind of phenomenon. To your point, I think you made the point about distribution, right? It's like again just part of sort of our evolution of education in the e-commerce space, which is that we really went into that space thinking that okay, this is just another channel, similar dynamics, right? It's like we have these competitors, they have all the shelf space here, here, and here, and so those are the people we also want to compete against in this space. And it's true, they're there too, the bigger competitors. But I think our entire lens and strategy was focused on that. And we were quite like dismissive of smaller brands. And I think also there is a bit of, I think, real like fair hesitation on our part, which is that in Canada, natural health products are really regulated. So it's not so easy for a brand to just sort of show up and not be following the regulations. And so, yet another reason why we could sort of not take them as seriously. So I think those two things together made us think, oh, even if they pop up, they can't, like, consumers won't trust it, right? If they don't see it on the shelf of the store that they normally go to, they're not also just going to go buy it in e-commerce. And so we have one of our subcategories that we're outside in the brick and mortar space. We're dominant. It's a niche category, so it's one that we've focused on it. We've dominated in terms of share, and we started to see a couple brands pop up that we couldn't find anywhere in store, couldn't find anywhere else. So we thought, what a sweet little brand, and and we thought
Isn't that cute?
exactly. Good for them. Like we didn't take it seriously, didn't take it seriously. I remember doing a test purchase too, just because I thought, oh, great branding. Like, let me check it out. Like, genuinely just not thinking it was a serious threat, just thinking, oh, let me learn a little bit more about it. And then, of course, slowly but surely, they started to erode our share significantly. And then they usurped us basically. So they became the number one brand in e commerce.
Was
Um,
it
in the
were they was the price difference a significant part of that? Could you give us like relative, dollar
Yeah,
percentage?
absolutely. So I would say they had about I think at the time, sorry, it's changed quite a bit because we've changed our strategy, but I think at the time they had like a 25% difference between our price and their price. So just significantly better pricing. Product quality, again, for the educated consumer, not as good. Genuinely not as, if you're an educated consumer of that category, you would know that, from a potency perspective, from the components, it didn't match up. But for the day to day consumer, even me, before I was in this industry, definitely would have thought it was comparable. So, again, under thought, our consumers are more educated than that. They'll know, they'll see through this, and they didn't. It was a good product. It wasn't just a complete garbage product either. So they thought that's good enough, and they were very dominant, very aggressive in their what we can tell from their advertising spend. So yeah, we definitely learned it the hard way.
Right. Well, yeah, that it's sort of the wolf in sheep's clothing combined with and thank you for being like so candid with this, a little bit of hubris that people have got, they don't know what we know and consumers are going to know better and that's not really our competitor. And then it started to genuinely erode your share and sit up and take notice.
Yeah.
So what was your approach from there? They're at a 25% discount. They're starting to erode your share. How did you go into battle with this new competitor?
Well, I think first and foremost, the thing that it taught us that we could take into the rest of the organization was that it really made us stand up and make sure that we were looking at each of our channels differently, right? So not just e-commerce versus brick and mortar. It was very much like, okay, who are the competitors at this key customer group, at this key customer, and what are our strategies to tackle that? So I think it was a really good lesson for us overall as an organization. I think we've done a good job of making sure we've really learned it. In terms of how we actually targeted that brand, we actually started to target them in terms of like content and the way we positioned our products, right? Is like we could see the gaps in their product offering. We could see sort of why we didn't think it could stack up, what was not as good about them. But we weren't targeting our content and our advertising or our messaging to kind of go toe to toe with them. We were doing it versus the sort of what we saw as the bigger brands from brick and mortar kind of thing. So we very much changed our, from format. They had a particular format they were pushing that we kind of had deprioritized on our end. And so we went ahead and just sort of structured our the way we positioned our product from a messaging perspective, from a format perspective, pricing, all of that, more around who was actually the dominant, who was actually the top competitor in that space, which was this particular brand.
So just to throw some examples out there, and you don't have to be specific, but would it be something like on the product detail page, having an us versus them comparison, even if it's not calling out that brand, but say our product has, this many units of this active ingredient compared to some competitors that only have this? Would you be as overt as
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah, exactly. So we didn't go so far as to sort of like show a bottle, and you see those
Yeah, you
competitors
don't
show
want to
like
give them that
yeah,
credit.
yeah. We weren't so forward, but yes, very very much like educate on the components of the product, make sure the consumer understands like these are the active ingredients. This is actually what you're looking for. We have the most of it. These other brands don't. And just sort of reinforcing that message. And also, hey, did you know that we offer this format? We weren't pushing one of our formats that we thought was like, if consumer wants it, it wasn't our top. We offer different formats in all of our products. So we were sort of starting to push that format that they were pushing to say like here's an alternative, and it's been effective so far. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I've seen this also in the CPG space actually most dominantly, where it's the thumbnail that points out the difference in pack size or quantity, or something like that, to actually show we've got more in our packet, or we've got it's a bigger pack size, or a more convenient pack size, or whatever that is. So it can go across the content on the page. You mentioned advertising as well. It's where you can lean into the message, and even in that thumbnail image to call out the competitive differences.
Yeah, exactly. And even, we're talking title, content,
Yeah.
A+, like we really did a sort of took a new look at the way we were sort of putting forth this product to consumers in that channel to say, hey, actually, we are a better version of this. Whereas before we were sort of saying we're a version of this other stuff kind of thing. So
Right.
yeah.
And you mentioned that either your assortment or pricing strategy has changed since then. Is that something you can share? Was that in response to the random factory brands at all?
Yeah, we did. Some of it was. We did sort of relook at sort of what our value proposition was, and part of it was just actually communicating our value proposition too. So we started to sort of lean more into that, knowing that that was sort of their big thing that they were doing better than us. They were sort of positioning themselves as a better value, better value. And so they also had, they had great branding. They did like just really strong, authentic branding. We also changed our product strategy in terms of, we had a pretty broad portfolio even for this niche category, and they were really zoomed in on sort of one or two. You know what I mean? Like they were just honed in on that, and it made us sort of make some good. It didn't mean in terms of like, again, because this is a larger brand for us outside of the e-commerce space. So it wasn't sort of like a SKU rat situation. It was more like, okay, well, what do we focus on in this channel versus sort of focusing on our entire portfolio?
Have any of those random factory brand competitors moved beyond Amazon?
That's a good question. Not that I know of.
Okay. Yeah.
Not that I know of so far. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is whether they do or don't, to your point about looking at what's our competitive set across different channels, not just are they at, being sold at GNC or the Vitamin Shop, or, what other key retailers, Walmart. It's still important to take the fact that they're doing really well on Amazon very seriously, even if they're not sold anywhere else.
Totally, yeah, and, I mean, like, we don't want to be surprised with them like we were on Amazon, right? So, so just kind of just understanding the entire ecosystem of competitors versus sort of what we've always known as the main
Yeah.
competitors. Yeah, yeah.
And so, in closing this loop here, Sege, what advice would you have for your peers at other companies as they start seeing these pop up, or they're trying to communicate, the importance of this issue to their exec team to take it seriously?
Yeah, I think the whole what we were talking about earlier, but just sort of like educating the rest of the teams about the e-commerce space and Amazon in particular is so key to this because it's hard to take it seriously unless you fully understand sort of the power of that channel.
Mm,
And I think, I know I made a joke about sort of us having the hubris, but it's genuine. It's like, we've had how many years of experience in these sort of big box retailers, brick and mortar, and so people are used to this. And so they think of it like that as like, shelf space is dominant. So if people
mm,
don't have shelf space, then how big could they possibly be? And so just understanding the role that Amazon is playing in the retail ecosystem now, I think is a big part of it. So first and foremost, that's just a benefit of the whole organization having a better understanding of that ecosystem. And then what I would say is again, the big lesson it taught us is just like look at each of your channels, each of your major retailers as sort of a separate ecosystem, and make sure that what you're doing in those spaces is actually sort of well equipping you for exactly what's going on in that particular space, not sort of a broader strategy, if that makes sense.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that we will, over time, see brick and mortar retailers embrace these brands as well. And there's, the example that everyone calls out is Anker, the consumer electronics brand with the,
Mm.
charging cables and things like that. And there have been a few other ones like Kusori is one that that make the rice cookers and instant pot appliances. I've got a Kusori kettle. It's great. Um, and Hero Cosmetics was another one that started. They had the acne uh, treatments. Started on Amazon, now is in Target and things like that as well. So these brands do sometimes transcend. I mean, the examples that I personally am aware of are very, very few. But if you think about a Walmart, for example, with a value oriented customer and they're looking to source brands that are value oriented, why would they not like start picking off the top selling brands on their marketplace, or looking at what's hot on Amazon and stocking those? It's kind of a no brainer. It is. I think we will see more of that.
Absolutely, right? It's like these retailers are the same as us as brands, which is like they want to satisfy the consumer, right? It's like they
Yeah.
want that share. They want to, they're just as sort of customer or consumer obsessed as we are. Like, so, yeah, I think that is a great point. And I think that if you get an early start to knowing how to sort of position yourself to sort of defend yourself against these brands, then it's just all for the best for sure. Yeah.
What's really interesting is a few years ago when Amazon started launching their own private label brands, and they launched a bunch of them, if you remember, like
Mhm.
apparel, just everything, and they registered all these different brands. They didn't make it necessarily super clear that they were Amazon brands at the time, but there was a wonderful website just not in existence anymore called This Just In. And they were tracking all of the different private label brands from Amazon and the trademarks and things like that, and all the different categories that they'd entered into. And the national brands got so upset about it. It felt so personal because, and then you'd start to see reports in the New York Times that Amazon was using sales data from national brands to actually identify top selling products and basically rip them off. And there was such a visceral reaction from brands because Amazon, who's supposed to be their partner, was using the sales data to rip off their products, which has been happening forever in brick and mortar retail, by the way. Um, and it was taken
Right.
very, very
That's a good
seriously.
point. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it was like just highly offensive. And then when, a lot of those brands just didn't work out, and Amazon sort of stepped away in a big way from that business, and they still have the Amazon Basics brand and a handful of others that in a few different categories, but they've stepped away from that because I think partly, in my opinion, from a PR standpoint, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. They were just getting so
Mm.
much negative PR about ripping off, innovations, especially from small businesses. But what's interesting to me is Amazon did all that, got a huge reaction, but with the random factory brands, the same a lot of the same brands are not really taking them as seriously. It's just a very curious kind of
Well,
um,
it makes sense though,
situation.
right? Because when you're seeing Amazon come out with their own competitor brands, it's Amazon.
Mhm.
It is like it's just like, it's Walmart, it's Costco.
Sure.
It is, they've got the stamina, the funds
Yep, that's true.
to wait. So like I made a joke about us having the hubris, but like it's not you're dealing with so many decisions and so many battlefields every day
Yeah,
as a brand, as brand owners, as organizations, and so to pick your battles is totally fair. Like,
yeah,
so I think it is not, I don't want to be dismissive of some of these brands. Some of these brands are probably like, we're already fighting the big ones with deep pockets. We can't fight every little one, but I think my advice to them would be to sort of keep an eye on the ones that are bubbling up. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Don't, make sure that you are keeping one eye on what's going on there. And when it warrants it, make sure that you're stepping up
yep,
to target them. But you're right. You can't go like how many random factory brands have gone nowhere, right? So and I think it's
sure.
fair,
Yep,
and we'll see how this evolves for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience here. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience today?
No, I mean, this is great. I think, we're, if you're ever looking for natural health products here in Canada, obviously pick up a Nature's Way product. And yeah, that's it really. We're just having some fun in the e-commerce space. And so thanks for having me. It was great to chat.
Great to chat.